Let's do a little roll call here. Jared Paul's here in spirit. Kaylin's here. Nick's not here. Did volleyball leave or something?
Yeah, volleyball's gone.
Oh, they did.
They left at 9, I think.
Okay. And Noah's gone. We got 2 people traveling, 1 person watching remotely. Guys, I'll say hi to Jared Paul so he knows that we care. Oh yeah, he put a big smile on his face. He doesn't get a lot of, love and attention. He's kind of.
Sorry.
Not that you guys are responsible for that either. Sorry, Jared. You can't even talk back because I have the speaker turned off. So, okay.
He just showed this camera. Hi.
Okay. Well, since we only have 5 of us, this might go pretty quickly. You each had a law or ruling assigned. Did y'all get that? So basically, you got to explain what it is in your own terms, and then give us a scenario, a made-up scenario of how it's either applied or misapplied, or how someone might violate it, or how it could be used to be helpful, anything like that. Kind of just a story that kind of helps drive home what it's all about. So start with Abigail.
All right. I had the Privacy Act of 1974, which is it's pretty straightforward. It's basically just how you can, it's regulations on releasing people's records. And so I found a website that had it put out the 4 main objectives. So this is from justice.gov, and I'll try to explain it in my own terms after I read what they said. But they say the first objective is to restrict disclosure of personally identifiable records maintained by agencies. So they're trying to keep information segmented into just the areas where it needs to be. Secondly, the objective is to grant individuals increased rights of access to agency records maintained on themselves. So people should be able to know what information a company has on them. Third, to grant individuals the right to seek amendment of agency records maintained on themselves upon a showing that the records are not accurate, relevant, timely, or complete. So the ability to amend records that agencies have on you. And then fourth, to establish, my computer just shut off, to establish a code of fair information practices that requires agencies to comply with statutory norms for collection, maintenance, and dissemination. So it's just this broad overview of, as a company, this is what you're allowed to ask, this is what you're allowed to keep, this is who you can send it to, this is these are the categories that you need to make sure you're updating consistently, that type of thing. So as I was reading this, or researching this, it reminded me of a book that I read back a couple years ago. It was like a Christian self-help book, quote unquote, whatever you want to call it. But
I'm just impressed that you read a book, because most people in this program don't read. No, I'm just kidding.
But no, the author's name, her name is Esther Fleece, and she was, part of the book was just her telling her story, and she was raised in an abusive home. Her dad, when she was 14, became very manipulative, and all of a sudden all of this stuff started happening, and it got to the point where her parents separated. He got her to testify against her mom falsely, and there's just all of this stuff, and so she legally separated from him, had a restraining order on him, and all of these things, where she was working very, very hard, moving all over to make sure that he couldn't find her because he was coming after her. And so reading this, the Privacy Act, made me think of in a situation like hers, if one of the companies that she worked for was not careful about maintaining her records and keeping them private instead of allowing people to access them, it would have been very easy in that situation for her to be put in danger because her father could have tracked her down. And so that would be an instance if the company had not been careful about who got a hold of her records. That would have been an instance where it would have been very dangerous. It's a good thing that we have this act, because in situations like that, it's very important that private records remain private.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great illustration. So let's make this very practical. You work for a large company for a number of years. Let's say you work for Mercy One Hospital, and you work there 10 years. And in your second year there, you have a coworker that falsely accuses you of, taking resources home. So they misunderstood. They saw you carrying something out. They thought it was work stuff. Instead of coming to you, they went to the supervisor. Supervisor wrote it up as an accusation. It goes in your record. 8 years later, you're on the verge of getting promoted. The vice president of human resources opens your file, and they say, "Oh, in your second year, you stole things from the company." Like, I didn't steal anything. Well, it says right here you're accused of stealing. Well, so basically, those records are inaccurate, and it could affect the entire rest of your career. You have a right through the Privacy Act to be able to see your records at any time. If your name's on it and it's about you, you should be able to look at it. And if there's something wrong about it, in all fairness, you should be able to get it updated and changed. So you should be able to put a letter in there that says this was a false accusation, it was all cleared up, there was a misunderstanding, here's a letter from the other person, whatever. So without this, you have two things, right? You have justice and fairness. Justice, okay, this is what legally the law, you go to jail if you violate this, you get fined if you violate this. Fairness is a little more, based on how people are treated. It might not be something that goes as far as getting someone in jail or punished or fined, but things should be fair. I mean, hey, in the United States of America, employment, we should have fair standards. And so this allows fairness. So that something that's in your record, not only do you have access to it, so it can't be private from you, but also you have access to update, change, or make it accurate, right? Now, if you did steal something in your second year, that goes in your record. There's nothing you can do about that. I mean, you did it, right? So you have to, it's there. So, and then the second part, what Abigail was talking about, your private information is your private information. So it's in the military, we had a term called for official use only, FOUO. And that would be stamped on almost everything. So you can only use it if you have a reason to use it. If you're outside the context of, reasonable use, then you're actually violating someone's privacy and you can be in trouble for that. So that's why even in simple business practices, you need to be organized. So let's say you have everyone's private information in a stack of sheets like this, and you just leave it out. You leave it on the table, and you leave the room for 4 hours, and you come back. Someone could have looked at someone's private information, their medical results from their health checkup, their private phone number, how many kids, whatever other information's in the file. You don't want people to be able to see that. So it has to be in a locked room, in a locked file cabinet. You have to have a system. You have to be able to prove that you're keeping it secure. So that kind of stuff is serious when it comes to employment. Good job, Abigail. All right, Rebecca, which one did you have?
OSHA.
OSHA.
It's Occupational Safety and Health Act of 1970. And so this was basically so that employees can work in a safe environment. So the employers have to train them and have the things put in place so that they will be safe at work. And it's guaranteed that this will happen because through the act, the employers are legally responsible for things that happen on the job. So they have to provide complete training and the right equipment for the employees to do the job that they are in safely. And they have to report incidents and be well researched regarding the health and safety for that specific job. So then my example was that if someone worked at a factory or something and they have to wear steel-toed boots or something like that, and say they came into work and they didn't realize that was necessary, the employer would be responsible to tell them either you can't work, you don't have the right boots on because you get injured. And if they didn't and the employee got injured on the job, then the employer would be responsible.
Absolutely true. And that is probably the most common thing that actually happens is something with safety related equipment where an employee should have it, but they don't. Ear protection, eye protection, mask, steel-toed boots, gloves, things like that, where it's just negligence. if you're taking down an old tree in your backyard, your dad might get out the chainsaw and just go to town with his tennis shoes on and ball cap. But if you work for Jared's tree trimming service, you have to have ear protection, full face protection, gloves, long sleeves, some type of thick pants, usually an apron or the chainsaw type pants. You have to have steel-toed boots. There has to be a perimeter of safety around you. So it's totally different, but people after a while kind of get complacent, start treating their job the way they would treat their own personal. You know, they might change the oil on their car by just crawling up under it and putting a, you know, pan underneath and whatever. But if you're working at Christian Brothers Automotive, you have to chalk the wheels, you have to have a safety observer, the oil has to go a certain place. You can't just, you know, do whatever you want. So OSHA is there not to make the government, you know, so strict, but to really protect workers, because employers don't always have the workers' best interests in mind. And every single organization on the planet, whether you're Christian, secular, big or small, is underneath OSHA regulations. So you could be, you have one employee, you know, you're under OSHA regulations. And so even Faith, so let's say that Faith allowed one of their buildings to get really, really, really bad and allowed the carpet to start to peel up, and there's threads of carpet sticking up, and as you walk through, you could trip over it. That's an OSHA violation. The school is responsible to trim those threads so no one trips and no one hurts themselves. Accidents happen. Sometimes you might have a faucet you don't know is leaking, and it leaks water onto the bathroom floor in the dorm, and someone slips and falls and cracks their head and has to go to the hospital. It's an OSHA violation. It might not get turned into OSHA unless the employer doesn't fix it as soon as they find out about it. Accidents happen, things break, but the life or death things are the ones that are the most critical. And so OSHA is super, super focused on that kind of stuff. So, all right. Yes.
Oh,
What's
can we
up?
run class real quick?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, we've got some of your Guam people here.
What? Chad and Kelly. That's great. I knew I was going to see you guys. I've already had COVID and totally recovered. Elizabeth, good to see you. I'll give you guys a hug. Man, this is awesome. I heard you guys are in town, so I can't come to the things. Well, they all hear all my worries, but so I started teaching at 6 this morning. So like my energy level because of the COVID fatigue, I'm in post-COVID, so I'm barely hanging in there for this. These guys are.
Just give them the class time off.
That's what I did for a couple of years.
Fridays off? No, Friday is when you have class.
Fridays when I have all three.
Okay, okay.
Oh, then I'm glad we stopped.
Yes. And you guys only here one more day?
We leave in one morning now.
We're staying.
She works at a place about a mile.
We should stop in to see her.
She works over at the stone shop. You guys can take them over there.
Well, we were
Oh, were
driving
you
down
right there?
Ankeny. We should have
No.
stopped in. I didn't even think about it.
My bad.
Well, we have,
Free time this afternoon.
yeah, we do have some.
Yeah, she's there at the front desk all the way till 5 o'clock.
But that's who we really.
Yes, that's good.
Eight rats on the wet.
That's a big blessing, you know. Yeah, very big
Good to
blessing.
see
So
ya.
good to see you too.
Sorry.
No, that's all right.
Stop in class.
It's okay. One connection.
Please, catch up.
So Chad, so Kelly, Olivia, Elizabeth Sanford, they've been working along with us for a number of years. Her husband Chad was the COO at Harvest, which, you know, doesn't sound like much. We get a school. Ministry, coffee shop and bookstore, and a church of 600. So he had a lot of responsibility. And Kelly was our main secretary. Yeah.
I've got a question going back to
Yep.
Abigail's.
Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna put my class brain back on.
If you are involved with an organization where you see something where like information is, like you mentioned, not protected well, are you liable as an employee for that at all?
As soon as you know, I'm sure there are nuances to the rules that I don't totally understand, but you know, the general phrase, you know, you see something, you say something.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're aware, let's say it's a privacy issue, you are aware there's a massive potential privacy issue, right?
Yeah.
it behooves you as an employee to let someone know right away. Because, you know, out of ethics, you know, you're protecting someone that should be protected. Out of just pragmatism, if something happens, it's going to affect everybody. And if it's a privacy issue that's happening to someone else, it could be happening to you too, and you don't realize it. So always escalate that up.
Is that something that you would ever consider leaving the organization for, or not being employed there?
I think it probably has to do with if you can somehow measure their intent. So let's say an organization is just grossly negligent. You bring it up to the appropriate authorities and they're like, they blow it off like, well, it's not that big of a deal. I don't care who knows my information. Why should you care who? Well, now you're starting to see there's really an undercurrent of, bad practices, right? And so you got to ask yourself, is it worth being aligned with someone that's got that big of a bad practice? Some things you can tolerate, some things might get better over time, or you wait until you're in a position of leadership, or maybe you don't have a choice. You can't leave, you're under contract, something. So there are laws in place now that protect whistleblowers. So let's say it's something that's like a federal offense level, like someone is actually sharing personal information, outside of the company. You can blow the whistle on that without any fear of getting fired or anything like that. Hopefully it would never get to that point, but stuff does happen. And think about certain industries, medical, banks, stuff like that, credit card companies, your information. When you work in the Social Security office and you share or mishandle anyone's information, I believe it's a federal crime. So you gotta be really careful. And I'm sure everyone knows that's there because there's probably enough, danger, but other organizations might be a little more lackadaisical about it. Christian school, hey, it's just, we're all cousins here anyway, So, but you do have to take it seriously. I don't know if I'd quit. If it was something small, but I could at least let the bosses know and they seem to care, I would probably stick with it. If they didn't seem to care, I might not quit that day, but I might start kind of putting out feelers.
Would it legally absolve your responsibility if you had it in writing that you talked to your boss?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so like an email.
That's covering your backside.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, you definitely want to, anytime you report something, you want to have a record that you reported it, just for your own.
Yeah.
If later on they find that there's actually much worse things going on, you can at least say, hey, I went on this date at this time. And, it's just good practice.
Okay.
Good practice anytime you have to bring up something negative to have a record of it. That's why I like emails, because there's always a permanent paper trail. So you can see what date, time, you can see if they read it or not. So that's really works very well. And actually, that might be the first step. You're aware of something, personnel files are being left out on the table when the person goes to lunch. It might be just email the supervisor, say, hey, I noticed this. Obviously, I don't want to get anyone in trouble, but I think we're violating some privacy issues here. Their response, now you have a permanent record of what you said and what was done. So. OSHA, got to report it quickly, or deal with it yourself. If you work somewhere and you see that there's, the sink is constantly dripping and it's making a slipping hazard, then you just got to make sure you report it. I walked right in front of the Nettleton last year. It was a super cold day early in the season and the hose was dripping and there was a sheet of ice across the sidewalk. So, I don't call OSHA, I call maintenance firm and say, hey, there's a sheet of ice across the sidewalk, So, and they fixed it right away. So that's what you're looking for. So, all right, Kaylin.
So I had the Cobra Act of 1985, and Cobra stands for Consolidated Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act. Honestly, don't really know what any of those words mean.
Yeah, they don't really correlate to what it
Yeah,
actually does.
that's
for
what
you, right?
I was trying to memorize it, and it didn't happen.
No.
So basically, all it is that when you're in a company and the company offers like health coverage, then it's going to be cheaper for you because you're on like a group plan, and so it's not going to be as expensive. And usually, it's you and your whole family that's on this plan, and it just kind of comes with your salary or whatever. And then if something happened, if you lost your job, or if like you had to move, or they call them like life events or something happened, then under this act up to, I think they said, yeah, it's 18 months. It's up to, it goes from 18 months to 36 months. You get to keep that coverage. You don't have to pay an individual rate. You get to stay on the group one. So there's a few like things that you have to have going. So you have to have like 20 or more people. Yeah, and then the circumstance has to be right. It can't just be something like stupid. But if you can't help it, then yeah, you get to stay on that plan. And then for my illustration, I just have, there's a man named George, and George has a daughter who's very sick, and let's say she has cancer, and she's getting treatments, and they decide that, then he has a job, and this job has this Cobra thingy, and they decide that they need to move because she can, if she goes to this other hospital, treatments are better, it's more specified to what she has. They're like, we need to move, but if we move, we're gonna lose all that health coverage and they're not gonna be able to pay for it. And then under this, legally, they have to tell him when he decides to quit that they still are covering him for up to 36 months, so.
Very good. It's a perfect illustration, actually. So I believe maybe under Obama, it got extended to the 18 to 36 months. It used to be just 12 months. And Cobra, so we've done it. So we left Guam in 2009 and we moved to New Hampshire. So we left Guam in June. We started working in August. We had full health insurance in Guam. So the organization that you're leaving does not have to pay for your insurance. So let's say that when I was in Guam, they were paying for 75% of my insurance. Well, when I left, they did not have to continue to pay the 75%. But what the insurance company that Harvest used had to do is they had to offer me a plan at the same dollar amount as what I was paying when I was still employed at Harvest. So if an organization is over 20 people, then they have to offer, it's automatic. You have access to Cobra coverage, which is basically extending your insurance at your own cost until you have other insurance, up to 18, 36 months, depending on the rules. So it keeps you from having to break in coverage, because the way the laws are written with health insurance, like my wife has chronic illness, she has rheumatoid arthritis. So if we had stopped our insurance in June, hopefully didn't get sick for 2 months and then start in August, the way the laws are written back in 2010, health insurance, they could deny my wife insurance because she has a pre-existing condition. And we had a gap in coverage. If you have no gap in coverage, they can't deny you coverage. But if you have a gap, so we paid for 2 months of Cobra, even though it was super expensive. So we were used to getting it where we were only paying 25%. Now I paid 100% for 2 months. And we didn't even get sick or anything, but it was good security. And then we started new insurance. Now the rules have gotten a little better, and one of the big presidential debate topics is pre-existing conditions and can insurance exclude you and stuff like that. But Cobra just makes it where if you're leaving a job, full-time job, and there's a company over 20, you know that you could, out of your own pocket, pay insurance until you get new insurance. Maybe you're going to become self-employed. Well, for the 12 months you're self-employed, till you get your own plan together, you could just keep paying on your Cobra insurance. So it's actually a great thing that the U.S. has. So, all right, Alyssa.
So I had the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, and it's basically just an act that was established to help prevent discrimination against people who are disabled in America. So the ADA extends to people in the workplace, transportation, public places, stuff like that. So it's a really important act because it basically prevents, let's say, someone from walking into a job who is paralyzed, like they can't use their hand or something. And maybe the interviewee notices that. They can't be like, well, we're not going to hire them just because they can't use their hand. They could like hire them, and then this act basically gives them gives the employee the protection that they need to be able to work there, but it also gives them protection in the sense of like it provides the company with what they need to be able to accommodate that person. So this could be something as simple as like moving a phone to a different spot, or like something as big as putting in a ramp in the entranceway so that people can get in a little easier. So an example, I was talking to one of my friends yesterday who works in a nursing home here in Ankeny, And she said that they have a lot of disabled, older people that live there. And so they put in like different like ramps or like, just bars so that they can hold on to stuff where they are. And they move things around and stuff like that. So it just kind of protects the residents, but also the employees. There's a lot of things in place that helps them not discriminate against people or turn people away just because they have a disability.
So this is something that affects us here on campus. As simple as if you walk outside the door of Domicos and you see that the sidewalk is all 6 inches, and then there's an area where the sidewalk gets down flush to the pavement and then comes back up. That's because of the Americans with Disability Act, because someone that's on crutches or wheelchair needs to be able to get into the building, you have to have a ramp. The doors have to be a certain width, so you have to be able to get a wheelchair through a door. It doesn't mean that you have to make every space equally accessible. What you have to do generally as a rule of thumb is make the space that the person needs accessible. So that's why every bathroom has one stall that's really wide so someone can get a wheelchair in there. But you notice like we don't have a wheelchair lift or elevator to the second floor of the dorms necessarily, right? Because if a student came that was in a wheelchair, as long as they could access a first floor dorm room, as long as you can make a room available to them, you don't have to make every room wheelchair accessible. Unless you're a wheelchair college where it's like, hey, everyone here is in a wheelchair. So you just have to make it. It also protects, like, let's say that someone has a stroke and they become partially disabled where they can't go up and down the stairs after they've worked somewhere for a while. The employer can't say, ooh, we want to get rid of this person. So we're going to give them all classes on the second floor of Gray Hall. You can't do that. You would have to accommodate, they were already working for you. That thing's not locking for some reason.
Yeah, I don't.
You have to somehow accommodate what they need. They're already with you. And so you have to give them a first floor classroom or whatever. You have to give them a first floor office. So they try to, some of the stuff is grandfathered into. So if you have an older facility, there are basic requirements that you have to have. But if you build a new building or you do a major remodel, you have to upgrade everything in the building. That's why sometimes it's easier to bulldoze an old building. So Bob Jones University just went through this. Their administration building, they literally bulldozed it. Now it's a waterfall feature and grass. To get the building up to code, if you're going to do a major remodel, was more than just building a brand new building down the road. So yeah.
So what do you do when you're interviewing someone who has an obvious, like a visible disability that would keep them from doing the job well? So like they could not physically do the job that that you're interviewing
That's
for.
a great question. That's the other side of the ADA. The ADA also protects the employer from, let's say, an undisclosed or partially disclosed disability that would keep the person from doing their job. So if someone comes in and let's say they have one arm that isn't working properly, right? But the job you have them doing is tour guide around campus. Well, you can give tours even though one arm isn't working. But let's say the job is working in the cafeteria, chopping food and stuff, and you really need both hands and you need to be able to do it at a certain pace and stuff. So the ADA also protects employers from not being able, basically it just gives guidance for what you can and can't ask related to the job. So specifically, if you have to have the job kind of clearly defined so that when an applicant comes in, you can screen. You're not discriminating, but you are screening. So the problem is a lot of employers kind of, if you kind of make it up as you go, you're putting yourself in a situation where you could get in trouble. And some people with disabilities, they know the rules because this really affects them a lot. So if you don't handle things right, they might have a grievance, as an applicant, like, hey, I feel like they didn't treat me right just because, of something I have wrong with me physically, or, just because I, can't lift 75 pounds, but the job doesn't really require lifting 75 pounds, why should I not be able to get the job? So yeah, Americans with Disability Act, that's why you have every new building that's 2 stories has an elevator. Every single one, if it's gonna have people on the 2nd floor, you're gonna have an elevator in it. That's why a lot of churches have to upgrade. When they do like a major remodel, they also have to upgrade and they have to add stuff onto their buildings that they didn't have before. So, but that's why you go into like an old building, like an old church I was in this weekend, and the stalls are like this wide, you know, and there's a ton of stairs and like there's no handrail and, you know, it's kind of like the Wild West. So, and other countries don't have the ADA. So I was in Saipan 15 years ago. I broke my leg on that first day playing soccer with a bunch of dudes, and I was supposed to speak at camp for the next 3 days. I couldn't get back to Guam. Went to the hospital, they gave me pain meds. I have a broken leg. Our apartment was on the 3rd floor, like 73 steps. I counted them every time I crawled up them on my hands and knees with my broken leg. And there's no elevator in the building. Even though the church auditorium is on the 2nd floor and all the housing is on the 3rd floor. But it's a Chinese Saipan school. They don't have the Americans with Disabilities Act, so they didn't care. I drug my broken leg up and down stairs like 5 times a day for 3 days, thinking, I wish I had the ADA. So, yeah. All right, Max, what did you have?
I had the Civil Rights Act, Title VII of 1964, it might have been 1972. And this is a federal law that applies to all private and public organizations greater than 15 people. And it basically is a discrimination law that says you can't discriminate anyone in basically every category except disabilities. So race, color, national origin, sex, religion. And this is specifically in businesses. So for like hiring, promoting, training, transferring, benefits, stuff like that. And so, yeah, I mean, that's basically what it is. And then the example that I made up was, there's Charity's a female in her mid-20s and is applying for a position at a cybersecurity firm. Company has currently compiled mostly men in the lower 30s. In the hiring process, another male applicant applies for the position. Both Charity and the male applicant are equally prepared, educationally and skill-wise. But you like as the employer, you think that maybe the guy would fit better in with the company culture just because it's all males. But according to the Civil Rights Act, you wouldn't be able to just make that decision and choose to hire the male because of his sex. So it would be wrong to make that decision to hire him over her strictly for that reason.
Yeah. All right, so where do you guys think the exception comes in on this? Let's talk about religion. I guess that's probably the easiest one to focus on. Where would an exception come in on the religious side of this? Because the law says prohibits discrimination based on religion.
Well, if it was like a Christian organization, you wouldn't want to hire someone in a different denomination. Like if it was Baptist, you weren't gonna hire a Catholic.
Yeah. What about Chick-fil-A? It's kind of a Christian organization. Could they hire? Can they not hire Muslims?
I would think they could. It's not like they're not like teaching; they're just serving food.
What do you think the main, like the dividing line between those that can and those that can't choose based on religion?
I think the main difference, at least with Chick-fil-A, is like it's founded on Christian principles, but it's not like I had a way I was going with this, and now it just went away. But it's like its foundation is Christian principles. So like if you like the majority of the managers or the owners are probably Christians, but it's not a requirement. Like their whole point is not like we're gonna throw the Bible at you when we give you your chicken sandwich. Like they just want to produce good food and like make people like feel like served or whatever the thing is. But I had a more eloquent thing in my head and now it's not coming out. But the point is it's founded on Christian principles, but the whole like it just because it's founded on Christian principles doesn't mean everybody has to be a Christian. It's more the point of, whereas like with CYT, the Christian Youth Theater Company,
pretty much all the directors need to be saved and Christians because it is founded, but like our goal, like their goal is to be able to share the gospel with kids during classes or whatever. So you probably don't want like a Catholic teaching your kid, you know, or whatever.
What do you think, Max?
I think part of that is also involved in like the policies that you have them agree to. Because I remember talking to, I forget her name, but from Alpha Women's Center,
Oh, yeah,
because when she
Jean-
came
Yeah.
last
Jean
year.
Thomas, yeah.
I had asked her about that, you know, how they keep people
Mhm.
who agree with their principles. And she said they kind of filter that out specifically by the principles or the like a doctrinal statement kind of thing
Right.
that
The employees have to agree to when they come in.
Yeah.
And so that does a lot of the filtering out. So if you don't agree with the principles that you are subjecting yourself to when you work here,
Yeah.
then you can't work here. And that kind of, without being discriminatory, it filters out a lot of the people
Mhm.
that
It's
wouldn't
more of a
agree.
screening than a discrimination. So Christian Brothers Automotive, let's say our friend Kurt over there, it's called Christian Brothers Automotive. He's a Christian. All the guys up front are Christian. Could he hire people based on their religion? Christian Brothers Automotive, all the top guys are Christian. What do you think, Abigail?
I don't think so.
Correct. So the stated difference is religious organizations that are religious in nature are not underneath the strictness of this. Now, this has gone all the way to Supreme Court. Religious organizations cannot discriminate based on race, color, national origin, or gender. But because they're a religious organization, religion can either come in conflict with or can actually be part of the job, right? So you have to have clearly stated statements of like what is and isn't acceptable. Where a lot of organizations, religious organizations, get themselves in trouble is they violate their own rules. And this is what happened. This went all the way, I think it was Love versus Sacred Heart Academy or something. It was out of Missouri. It was a Lutheran school in Missouri. They had a lady that took a leave of absence. When she wanted to come back, they said, no, we're not going to hire you back. And they said, you know, we realize you're charismatic. We're Lutherans. We don't want you back. So she sued them, went all the way to Supreme Court. Her suit was upheld at the Supreme Court level because she had had the job before. And they never said anything about her being a different denomination. And now they're trying to use it. So they did not consistently apply their own rules. So that's one. And schools and churches do this sometimes. They get desperate. They really need someone to be their CFO. So they're like, okay, like I had a friend who was a pastor in California, huge church. And they're like, you know, they actually hired a nursery coordinator because there's so many kids, Seventh-day Adventist. They're like, she's not doing anything on Sundays anyway. So Seventh-day Adventists, they worship on Saturdays, right? So she's available on Sundays, she runs it. But you could really get yourself in hot water later on if you're looking for an assistant pastor and a Seventh-day Adventist applies, or someone that's just any other denomination. Because they'll be like, well, you didn't apply it over here. And it's the same policy for all employees. So inconsistently applying it gets you in big trouble. Not having it clearly articulated gets you in big trouble. And then not being wise in the way you say things during the application process, right? So you don't necessarily have to torch someone just because they're not like you, you know, and make a big deal out of it either. You don't have to tell people always all of your reasoning. But if you do tell people your reasoning, it needs to be consistent with your policies and with the law. So religious organizations have a religious exemption if religion is part of what you actually do. Christian Brothers Automotive, religion is not part of what they do. It's part of who they are. It's part of their founding. Like America had a bunch of Christian founders too, but you cannot say, well, we are winning every car to Christ. It doesn't work that way, right? It's not an event, it's not a religious organization. It's an automotive, secular organization. So they can't have policies that discriminate based on religion. But, you know, Christian Brothers, Christian Camping, it could if they handle it right, so.
So in the case, so with like the church that hired the other denominational lady for the nursery, what if they realized that that was like not a good idea? How would they get out of that?
I think you'd have to be very careful legally, right? Because once you've done something, it's hard to undo it. You would get legal advice to basically anytime you build something, you make something, you create something organizationally, to unmake it or break it down and kind of remake it, you have to be super careful if it affects someone's life. Let's say that you don't have a policy that says only Baptists can be hired at our Baptist college, but everyone that's working here is a Baptist. But then someone comes in and says, you don't have a policy that says that only Baptists can work here. You should add a policy. Well, it's not that hard to add a policy then because it's not really affecting anyone. Everyone before is already kind of grandfathered in. You're not worried about that. You're just thinking about the future. So organizations have had to do this, like churches. All Christian Law Association 10 years ago said, all churches, you need to put a statement in your church constitution about not performing same-sex marriages, right? And you need to say what you believe marriage is. And then they highly recommended use of your facility only for members, because you don't want, let's say, same-sex marriage to apply to come use your auditorium, and you say, nope, we don't do that. Oh, really? Well, you let these other people do their wedding here. So Christian Law Association had everyone update their constitution with those two additional things to protect. Not that it was an issue at that time, but you're looking ahead to say, how can we, like Proverbs says, a wise man, sees trouble far off and avoids it, right? So you're just trying to be wise. And HR is a lot of that, is trying to see trouble far off and avoid it. And so it's a worthwhile thing. I mean, if at least one person is kind of, as I always say, keeping their eye on that ball, at least the rest of the organization can kind of breathe easy. Like, hey, we got someone that's kind of keeping their eye, they're on the wall, looking out for trouble. That's a good thing. So not all countries look at this the same. So what I'll do is I'll have those that aren't with us today. Sounds like they're dearly departed. Those that aren't with us anymore, those that are not physically in class, all submit like a little 2-minute synopsis of theirs in the discussion. I'll have them do a video, and then you guys can all watch it and just give them a thumbs up. So, but these other countries don't necessarily have the same laws. Some countries have really none, and discrimination is actually not an issue. Some Asian countries discriminate all the time. Some Asian countries have so many people groups that they favor certain groups and they cause trouble for other groups. So America is a very blessed place. Canada has very similar rules. Let's see here. But they're more decentralized in their lawmaking. So at the provincial level, the discrimination on the basis of language is actually allowed in all of Canada except for Quebec, where they're bilingual, right? So you can actually discriminate. You can not hire someone basically if they don't speak English first in the rest of Canada. But in Quebec, you can't, because everyone's probably French first, English second, maybe. So Mexico, let's see here. One hiring law states an employer has 28 days to evaluate a new employee's work performance. After that period, the employee has job security, and termination is difficult and expensive because everyone's in some kind of union. So here, let's say I worked here for a month and I did a terrible job. They could fire me. I mean, they could. It would be within their rights. But in Mexico, if I did a terrible job after 28 days, they're gonna have a hard time getting rid of me because I'm part of a union that's gonna protect me. And the laws back that up. Australia, they didn't have any discrimination laws till the 1980s, and they generally apply to women who needed improved opportunities. Workplace Relations Bill gives employers greater flexibility to negotiate directly with employees on pay, hours, benefits. So a lot of countries have a lot of unions, and then the employers have a hard time working things out directly with their employees. They always have to go through unions. So countries have enacted different laws to help regulate that. Let's see here. Germany, although women make up a relatively large proportion of the workforce, they're comparatively underemployed and underpaid. German companies are making strides in addressing inequality. Laws require companies to have representation, participation thus redistributing power within the organization, putting labor on a more equal footing with the interests of management and stockholders. So they have work councils and board representatives. So they kind of have like a little governmental setup within every organization to kind of help, watch out for the employees. So, yeah.
For something going back to like the language thing, I know we had talked about you can't ask somebody like if they know any other languages. How would you handle something like where knowing a language is part of the job description? But you can't ask somebody like if you're looking for someone who speaks Spanish for your
Yeah, you can.
privately
So if
for-
it's
for-
job related, so that would be so let's say that you need to hire someone to work in the call center and they're gonna be handling calls from English speaking and Spanish speaking, then that's part of the application process. You can ask that.
Okay.
You could even do some kind of aptitude test before you hire them. So, they have to be able, just like Kelly Temp Service, which I did that for one Christmas break and one summer, where, you have to take a typing test because you have to be able to type a certain number of words a minute. You have to be able to use certain software. I believe language would fit into the same thing if it is specifically job related. If it's kind of like nice to have, but it's not actually part of the job, you'd probably be in dangerous territory if you tried to make it a screening thing, or if you use it as a screening opportunity inconsistently. That's where I think most people get in trouble. That's why you got to really have a clear process so that you don't, every person has some kind of prejudices. We all do. We don't even realize we have them. So, my grandfather fought in World War II in Asia. I remember as a kid, my grandfather saying, if any Orientals move into this neighborhood, we will move out, kids. I'm like, oh, Grandpa doesn't like Orientals. What's an Oriental? Oh, it's an Asian person. All Asian, all Orientals. I mean, okay, so he served in the Philippines. He fought against the Japanese. I mean, so how does that work? And then I get stationed in Japan for 3 years. So maybe that's where that conversation came from. But he didn't have a hard time with Germans. They were kind of like the other bad guys at the same time, but a German person's okay, but an Oriental person's not okay. So my grandfather had prejudice against Asian people, and he probably had that his whole life, till he died. There was no change in his mind about it. Not that it's good, it's not good, but it's something exists. Most people have prejudices kind of in them. Now, doesn't mean you have to apologize for all your ancestors and that they're, all this, there's a lot of political things that go into this conversation right now, especially. So we could have had this conversation a year ago a lot differently, right? But bottom line, everyone, every ethnicity, every skin color, everyone has little prejudices. Me, for some reason, I don't like French people. I don't even know why. I like French fries, French toast, but I just don't like French things for some reason. I think when I was a kid, my history teacher taught me that French people were weak and they surrendered too soon to the Germans, and I just have always had that in my head. So, I mean, of course I love French people, but I kind of make jokes about them in a way that I don't have any jokes about, people from Belgium, but I have jokes about people from France. Well, some people have the same thing about Polish people, or some people have the same thing about, you name it. So there are little things inside of us that have to, as the Holy Spirit helps us grow and mature, it kind of gets worked out of you. Or the best thing can happen is that your eyes get opened by a new experience. My kids had the privilege of growing up in the Pacific with Asian people and Micronesian people and all these different, so they're not nearly as, they don't have all these little stumbling blocks that were built into them because they grew up in a multicultural situation, which is awesome. People that grew up in kind of a monochromatic situation, they sometimes have prejudices they don't realize. I'm not talking about massive prejudice like Ku Klux Klan. I'm just saying where you just kind of have like preferences that might dictate a decision you make about something. You might make a quick judgment call or a rash decision that, if you're able to step back and kind of look at the facts, you look at it differently. I say all that to put in the context of this. you're sitting across from someone, you're getting ready to interview them to work where you're gonna be their boss. If you don't have a clear process already laid out, those little things that might be inside of you that you don't even know are there could impact the way that next 30-minute conversation goes. So it's good to have a process to protect yourself from anything that might be in there you don't even know is there. So I guarantee you, if you were to, I would say it this way, every person, if you were to ask them enough questions, you'd find that they have some little like preference or, annoyance with something about some group, and so you're trying to make sure that that never impacts the fairness that comes with the way someone's treated at work, on the job, when they're hired, how they're promoted, how they're paid, all that kind of stuff. And some of the other laws that your classmates are going to share, they also do the same thing. They also protect people. Some rules can be more what they would call like usurious, where they're just more of a big deal. Some, and where they have big punishments, and it's just like, if you violate this one and you're going to be on the front page of the newspaper, versus this one over here, it's more kind of like, okay, slap on the wrist. You didn't handle that quite right. Let's do it different next time. So that's why HR managers are so valuable, because they can protect an organization from getting in big trouble. And organizations that can't afford to have an HR manager, they need to have someone that at least is familiar with HR laws, so that the organization doesn't do something dumb. In churches, schools, colleges, big businesses, small businesses, we're all susceptible to doing something dumb. So. All right. Okay, we talked a lot about HR, but it's actually a pretty interesting topic. I always get good feedback on it. Next week, there's a little extra part to this chapter on professionalism, and we're going to talk about that on Monday and Friday next week. So we're going to talk about, we probably won't really get into because we talk about this so much, I don't think we'll need to get into diversity training and all that kind of stuff. I mean, it's going to be an issue if you work in any secular organization. You're going to sit through all kinds of diversity briefings and stuff. But we're going to talk about professionalism next Monday and Friday. All right. So including you from the employee's point of view, how can you project professionalism? So, okay. All right. See you guys later. Thanks. Oh, and don't forget about this next Friday. I think it's next Friday. Pretty sure it's next Friday.
Did you put that on campus?
I did. Let's see. Jared, thanks for joining us. Let me see. I can confirm it now.
I just have. What happened to their free markets? Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. COVID triggered that.
We went all the time.
I know, I did too. It was a good time.
Hey, did you look at your schedule?
Lunchtime.
Okay.
Do you have another class?
Right here. What's so great about Yep.
Well, I think we should go to Smoky Row sometime for a class because they
I would
have
love
a
that.
conference room basically.
Yeah, I know.